Hello and welcome back to the MSBaithak podcast. I'm your host Didi, and joining me today once again is my friend and your co-host Vedant. On this episode, we'll be reviewing the F1 GP held in Saudi Arabia. So let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready our opinions, and dive right into the conversation. Hello Vedant. I think my text after the race yesterday sums up what we went through, for 2 hours yesterday. How exciting that race was. So I texted Vedant, breathe after after the race was over. I feel F1 finally provided us with more action across a race weekend than Formula 2, and that speaks volumes about how good the racing was at Saudi Arabia. Uh, you know, yes, there's a lot of questions around Saudi Arabia, the safety in general of the region, the safety of the track, but you can't deny that it did provide some of the best action we've seen in a long, long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, especially the last few laps, because whenever we see fights in Formula One in general, it's during the beginning of the race. Just the drivers trying to stay ahead, and then maybe the pit exit fight, and those 2 laps out of the pit stops just to try and get that advantage. But never have we seen in recent years, in normal racing conditions, that is, two drivers going for the win and fighting till the very last lap. And I'm specifically saying in normal racing conditions because we have seen this situation many different times under restarts basically. But yeah, in normal racing conditions, this was extraordinary.
Yeah, I think the way a lot of people summed it up is, racing in this new era is not just about making that pass. It's about making that pass and trying to maintain position because there is plenty of opportunity for the person who gets past to come back and, take it away from you right after. And we saw that with Esteban Ocon and Lando Norris towards the absolute end of the race. So, again, it was just absolutely like I mean, I had to remind myself to breathe, which is why I texted you. So that sums up the weekend for me. But obviously, the going into the weekend, Mick crashed during qualifying on Saturday. Thankfully, he walked away unscathed from that crash, although he couldn't take part in Jeddah because of technical reasons. They could have gotten a car together, but then they wouldn't have had enough parts for Australia. Had they crashed again. But he's ready and he's fit to go to race in Australia in 2 weeks' time. But Vedan, let's dive into the three things from F1's weekend in Saudi Arabia. And the first one that I have for you is something that I believe we'll hear a lot more of as the season progresses. We've seen this happen in race one. We saw a lot of it happen in race two, and that is how many times can we play DRS chicken before it gets a little too silly?
Yeah, of course, it makes for great racing. It makes for great racecraft, you could say that. But I think it's only 2 races, right? It's only 2 races, and for now, it is a spectacle of sorts. Okay, look at this. This is brilliant. But yeah, as you said, after Australia, after the changes of this year, they are looking to hopefully get 4 DRS zones, and after Imola. So I think when after of 3-4 more races, if this thing continues, it might look, as you said, a little silly.
Um, okay. But before I put my argument forward, of what I feel, how I view this sort of racing, obviously, you have to give credit to Charles Leclerc. Absolutely surgical in the way he's gone about racing, both in the first race and the second one. Especially the second time, when Max came to overtake him, and then Charles Leclerc slowed down, so that Max would get into cross that DRS detection zone before him, and then Max got onto the brakes even harder and locked up, and Charles saw that opportunity to basically take off from there,
Yeah.
knowing that if he slows down any further, Max is just going to come to a halt and they're going to get past. And I think that second pass that Charles avoided on I think lap 43 just goes to show how much in control Charles Leclerc is in that car. And that is very, very promising for Ferrari, I believe, because in the past, I have said a lot of times that when Charles Leclerc starts on the front row, and there's a chicane as the first corner, a tight
Yeah.
first corner, not just a chicane. Usually I have my heart in my mouth and I'm really, really nervous on whether or not he's going to do something that's going to end his race. But after the first two races, I am so confident that Charles Leclerc is ready if a championship battle comes up to him. That I'm not worried anymore about what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw Charles, his abilities in 2019, with the way he raced in Monza, the way he raced in Spa. So, I mean, yeah, Spa as well. He won both the races, and then of course Russia and Singapore as well. 2019 was a good season for him, his first season in Ferrari, but of course last two seasons he was in the midfield, right? Last two seasons he was absolutely bang in the midfield, and when you are in the midfield, you tend to make mistakes. You can go into people who are either side of you. So I think, as far as your concern is concerned, I think as long as he's in front, he can avoid all those crashes in the first turn.
Yeah, absolutely. Now getting to my argument about the DRS. Now, when I just basically said how great Charles Leclerc was when he did whatever he did on lap 42 and 43. But when I was watching it happen in real time, my biggest concern was, are we going to see are we going to see the same thing that happened in Saudi Arabia last year, where it was, instead of Charles being in front, it was Max and Lewis. Max being in front and Lewis behind him, and where they got crashed into each other basically. Uh, and that is why I feel this DRS game. Firstly, to me, this DRS game is not healthy for racing in a way. A little bit is fine, is understandable. It's a little strategic. You can enjoy it a little bit, but to the extreme, the extreme case that we saw with Charles and Max on the second time on lap 43, and then what we saw last year with Max and Lewis, with them coming together. I think that is what F1 needs to avoid. And if this keeps on happening again and again, it is definitely, I wouldn't say it's bringing down the quality of racing, but it's definitely not the way at least I want to go about racing, if that makes sense. You want them to go flat out. You don't want them to, make some sudden moves that could be dangerous on track. And in Saudi, you're basically coming down that straight at 300 kilometers an hour, and then braking into that zone, and then taking the next corner at about 120, 160 kilometers an hour. So definitely very dangerous. And I think F1 needs to rethink their DRS zones if they're going to continue with it. But I will not be against, if F1 chooses to not have DRS, or at least experiment without DRS in a couple races this season. I'm going to be all for it and see how that affects racing. Although there have been a couple of drivers, especially in the midfield, who have commented that without DRS, it is still really, really difficult to overtake. But again, I've said this before, overtaking is not just racing. Racing is also the fact that when you're following each other, you're trying to make a move into a corner and things like that. Braking late, braking hard, making those dive bombs. All of that also counts as racing. All that strategy that we talk about is also racing. So maybe we might lose one aspect of the way Formula One goes racing, but there might be another solution, like we talked on chat yesterday, about having a greater ERS, capacity or something like that, more like a push-to-pass kind of system in F1.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially let's take Saudi as an example. The last corner view, you have a long DRS straight coming into the last corner. The cars are reaching the peak, the top speeds, and then a hairpin, and then another DRS straight. So I think that is the most dangerous situation where the leading car can brake and the following car will brake even harder. And as you said, that it like, let alone the quality of racing or what we expect to see, it becomes just plain dangerous, right? So I think,
Absolutely.
and I mean, uh, like, basically wherever there are two DRS straights next to each other, those are the situations. These things will happen throughout the season again and again, and throughout the season, absolutely, yeah. So I think we can reduce the number of DRS straights as such, because from what I see, DRS is still necessary for Formula One right now, to because say you can make that you can attempt that overtake with your skills, but you need to catch up to the leading car, right? And with the slipstream effect being reduced from previous years, I think DRS is will help in reaching that car. Had it been previous years, you were following more closely like this year, but you also had the slipstream effect. So then you could have avoided DRS altogether. But I think DRS is necessary.
Yeah, which is why I said, F1 needs to experiment before it has a knee-jerk reaction to anything. I don't think F1 is going to have a reaction at all
Yeah.
to the DRS thing yet. But if it does, it has to be experimental first. And like you said, they can be smart about how they place the DRS zones. In Australia, we have 4, so it'll be interesting to see how they go about it. But again, they definitely have to reevaluate it to a certain extent to understand, uh, how can we elevate the racing while minimizing safety concerns and looking silly on race weekends. But enough about that. Let's talk about the second thing, and that is, has there a new precedent been set from the Stroll Albon crash that could determine racing standards at the front of the field once the championship battle heats up? Now, obviously, that was a long headline, but obviously, what I'm referring to is the fact that Albon dived into turn one, or the first chicane, on the inside of Lance Stroll and then crashed into him. He was more than halfway or almost halfway alongside Stroll's car, and yet he was given a 3-place post-race grid penalty for Australia. So what does that mean for racing up the field? Is that a warning for Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez, and Max Verstappen that, hey, be careful, what you got away with last year may not you may not get away with this year?
I mean, definitely, if the new race directors have to make a stand, if they have to make their presence known, they will, so obviously they can't be giving away different penalties for different area of the field. Yeah, different drivers
Yep.
basically. So I think this penalty, if they gave this penalty, it should remain consistent, and like, I think they would have learned, FIA and the new race directors would have learned from the last year and the mistakes created last year, and their new frameworks would have been based around that, right? So I think setting the precedent is very important at this stage, because again, there are 2 race directors, it's not one race director, so it is his sole discretion, right? There are 2 race directors, they have to work together across different races, so both of them won't be at each race, and it's very complicated.
I mean, it's not just the race director, right? It's the stewards who are actually,
Yeah, I mean, again,
basically awarding the
again,
penalties.
the same stewards are not at each race, right? So I think the new frameworks, if implemented correctly, which we hope they are,
Consistently, I think that is
Yeah,
that is the word
consistently.
we're looking for here.
so yeah, I think it is definitely a precedent, which even if they don't make it consistent, they would be hoping that this becomes a precedent, consciously or unconsciously.
Yep. Hopefully the two, at least Red Bull and Ferrari bring this particular incident to the attention of their
Yeah.
leading drivers, at least, to let them know that, hey, it doesn't seem like this will be acceptable this year. So make sure that you keep it as clean as possible. Basically, obviously you want hard racing, but you want to also keep it as clean as possible. Now, obviously, like any other incident, this crash was also, people were divided over who was at fault. But I've looked at the replays a couple times, and it seems like Albon wasn't, like, the car under rotated, or there was understeer for Albon, and he just couldn't get the car rotated enough, and he would have plowed into the side of Stroll even if Stroll took a wider line through the corner. So I'm not surprised that Albon was awarded the penalty, but we've seen last year cars come together, take a shortcut, and then not be awarded penalties at all on both sides of the equation. So it'll be interesting to see what happens across the season with such incidents. The second one was regarding that I wanted to bring attention to was regarding Carlos Sainz and Checo Perez. Obviously, Carlos Sainz crossed the safety car line on after the first safety car restart before Checo Perez did, but they restarted where Checo Perez was still ahead of Carlos Sainz at the safety car restart. And after the restart, Sergio gave the position back to Carlos. Now, a lot of people might have thought that why isn't Sergio giving back the position to Carlos under the safety car? Now, technically, Carlos would not have been able to take back that position under safety car because you're not allowed to overtake under the safety car when the safety car is out. So Red Bull did the right thing, but obviously we have heard from the race directors that they're not gonna go to teams and ask them to give back the positions. But usually, like at least up until last year, I believe what would have happened is Sergio would have gotten a message from the race directors saying that, hey, you need to fall back behind Carlos Sainz and let him through, and Carlos would have received a similar message. But it seems that might not be the case this year, and if this were to happen again, even if you're in front, you might be starting behind the other person.
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, Red Bull. I mean, I don't know what Red Bull were thinking about where to give the position back, but they might have been trying to protect Max Verstappen in P2 at the restart, right?
Yeah, that is true.
So
Yeah,
that may be
yeah.
the case, but the race directors giving the teams enough responsibility and power to make that decision on their own is quite surprising to me because, yeah,
It's quite brave. I mean, the trust has been returned, but technically, I believe Carlos should have still had, should have still been ahead of Sergio Perez at the safety car restart because obviously it's all about advantage, and if that is what had happened, that is what the starting order should have been. Now, I don't know what is going to be the way forward. We haven't heard anything about it from the stewards or the race director yet, but it'll be interesting to see how this pans out in the future if it were to happen again, and if Ferrari are going to bring it up in the next meeting that they have in Australia or whatever that
yeah,
might,
absolutely. I mean,
whenever that may
Ferrari,
be.
like, had there been communication between the teams and the race director, obviously Ferrari would have negotiated it. But Ferrari definitely did not want to take any, preemptive action to just, basically overtake under the safety car and for no reason at all, basically. So, yeah, it's it's an interesting,
Absolutely.
strategy what the race
Also, just
directors are trying to do. But let's see.
yeah, and also along the same lines, no penalties were awarded to Charles Leclerc for crossing the pit lane line. That divides the main straight from the pit lane entry, and then he also set the fastest lap when there were yellows in the yellow flags in the first sector. After that Albon Stroll incident on the last lap, and then Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz also I don't think got penalties yet at least for speeding, and there were I think a couple more drivers for speeding under yellow flags towards the end of the race. Um, it wouldn't have made a difference if Charles, Carlos, and Sergio had gotten penalties because of the distance between them and their relative positions and things like that. But I don't know what that means for the future. It's a little bit unclear to me, at least, and we'll see what happens. And again, I think it there's a lot to come from the two race directors, I believe, and I'm a bit apprehensive, but at the same time,
Yeah,
it'll be
absolutely. I
interesting for
mean,
me.
the end of the race was pretty chaotic for everyone. So I don't know what was happening in the race control, but let's see what goes on in the future. Because, like, if we haven't seen any
Yeah,
penalties
definitely.
right till now from them, I don't think they'll get any penalties for Jeddah now.
Yeah, that is what I would assume too. All right, yeah, let's wrap that up and let's move on to our third thing from F1's weekend in Saudi Arabia, and that is reliability concerns for all four power unit manufacturers. Now, the worst of all was obviously Yuki Tsunoda, who could not take part in qualifying and then could not even start the race. So, I think there were some speculations that Red Bull might be testing solutions for the fuel pump failure that they had, in Bahrain, in Yuki's car. But I'm not sure how much expectation, or how much weight would I put into that particular speculation. It just seems like a power unit failure. And we've seen the Red Bull struggle with it even in Bahrain. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's something similar. And then Bottas missed out on points. And then Alonso, I think this was the biggest blow at that. Alpine missed out on double points. So they'll really be looking into what happened, especially given the fact that they're usually really fast at Saudi. They were really good last year, and then even this year, they could have been in the points. And then Mercedes,
Yeah,
Ricardo missing
absolutely. I
out
mean,
too.
see, it's the second race of the season. I thought, like, and I think everyone thought that Bahrain would be the high attrition race, but Saudi turned out to be the high. Like, Bahrain had its own attrition towards the end of the race, but Saudi turned out to be the high attrition race. But then again, it's a new set of regulations, both aerodynamic and engine regulations. So it's common, but yeah, I think all the manufacturers have their priorities set right now, because each of them have seen a failure now.
And definitely more, concerns for Ferrari coming out of Saudi Arabia, I believe, because not only did Bottas had a power unit failure, or whatever the issue was, I'm not exactly sure, but we also saw Carlos had an electrical issue which was identified right before an hour before the race and had to be rectified. And then I believe Charles was also carrying some sort of an electrical issue because his the lights on the back of his car were not working throughout the race. So Ferrari has much to look into. Now I don't know, what kinds of issues those are, whether those are power unit or just like wiring loom issues that might have occurred during the race. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. I want to talk about Alfa Romeo though. Obviously, Bottas was in the points, but after I think 6 retirements yesterday, Joe could have finished in the points. So he finished 11th, and had Alfa Romeo served the penalty correctly for Joe, I believe Joe could have had double points
Yeah,
finishing 2
absolutely. And
consecutive races.
I texted you that, Alpha being Alpha. We saw this last year so many times. Alfa Romeo making operational mistakes, Alfa Romeo making pit stop mistakes. Like, I don't remember the count, but they definitely served at least 2 penalties wrong last year. At least 2. So I don't know what goes on in that pit box, but they certainly need to make changes there, because see, last year it was no issue. They were not fighting for points. They were anyway finishing 17th, 18th, 19th, and a wrongs penalty, like a double penalty, would not have cost them much because Haas was too far back. This year they are scoring. They have the potential to score double points each race. So they need to get on top of their operational side very quickly.
I mean, Haas was on top. Haas got lucky also, during the race. Kevin Magnussen was able to pit and finish in the points after doing that really long stint on the hards. And on the other hand, Lewis Hamilton, who was ahead of him and could have potentially finished P6, was unable to pit because the pit lane got closed at not the wrong at an inconvenient time for Mercedes. And Lewis Hamilton, who finally showed some good pace, race pace, got only 1 point at the end of the day. So definitely that. Now that reminds me, I don't really understand why it took so long for them to close the pit lane after those 2 incidents. Especially given the fact that both Ricardo and Alonso were basically in the pit lane entry. So it was really surprising that even Kevin Magnussen was not penalized because he essentially had to cross the pit lane line to get into the pit lane and things like that. So definitely a lot for I believe the new race control, if we were to say, is still not up to speed, and there's a lot more they need to they need to be a lot more efficient than they have been, I guess, in Saudi. But yeah, pit lane took forever to close, and that's a big question mark. I
Yeah, I
believe
mean,
that not enough people are
I
talking about.
texted you or maybe one of my other friends that, like, as soon as the first car stopped, I texted the pit lane is closed, and as I wa- yeah, and as I
And we
was
saw a
writing
similar
that,
issue in
okay, now
F2. Yeah.
K-Mag, Hamilton, and all these cars can't pit. K-Mag just went into the pits, and I think there was another driver, Hulkenberg, went into the pits, just
Yeah.
almost barely touching these stopped cars. So it was rather not right, basically, because the pit lane always closes in times like this.
Yep, and that's a great segue to the last question of today's podcast, Vedant. It's not the three things from F1's weekend because this is a greater issue. It's going to affect F1 in the coming years, and that is what can be done to make the Saudi Arabian GP safer. Now, I want to, I obviously want to bring your attention to a few more things. Not the efficiency of the race control. Obviously, those issues are separate. They can crop up at any race, but this issue is regarding the Saudi Arabian GP itself. Now, obviously, we saw Mick crashing out, and then drivers called for better curbs. These curbs were too dangerous, according to the drivers. And then the second thing was, that the walls need to be farther away from the edge of the track. Now, obviously, these issues have come into focus because of Mick's crash, and also, the focus was somewhere else last year, and that was with visibility. Now they addressed that to some extent, and now the focus has shifted to these issues. But another big issue that I felt went largely unnoticed was the fact that, unlike Monaco, Saudi Arabia does not have well-positioned cranes outside the circuit that can just pick cars up quickly and remove them from the track. Instead, we have to take actual tractors, cranes, trucks onto the track and then remove the cars, and it's a very narrow circuit. We saw what almost happened in Formula E last year, where where a few cars almost crashed into the crane. And if we take our minds back to what happened in 2012, it resulted in a horrific accident, and that ended up with us losing Jules Bianchi. So again, a lot of questions there, which I feel not enough people are asking, not enough attention is being paid to, and I believe that particular safety procedure also needs to be looked at. And the second thing is, now a lot of people talked about this, and was the fact that why is the medical car taking so long to reach, the place of the incident? That is because there are no service roads around the Saudi Arabia GP track, and I think that is a larger issue than I feel. Obviously, the curbs can be changed, but a larger issue than having walls next to the track. And I think those two things that I just mentioned need to be addressed as soon as possible, especially if F1 is to return to Saudi Arabia for the coming 8 to 10 years.
Yeah,
Like the
absolutely. I
deal
mean,
says.
the service, especially the service roads and the positioning of the cranes is very important for a street circuit like Saudi. And you look at it is the second longest circuit on the grid, and it's not straight like Spa, that like largely straight like Spa, that the medical car can go on a straight line. Even it has so many corners and whatever. But yeah, I think the Jeddah Corniche circuit in its entirety, and we said that last year when it was unveiled, let alone the racing part, let alone the circuit layout part, but I think the entire facility is, I mean, it sorry, it was rushed last year. It took 6 months to build it, and I think it took only a few weeks to get it approved. So I don't know what happened in the back end in the all those processes, but I think the Jeddah Corniche circuit needs a lot of changes. And we talked about uh, the cranes and the service roads, but the Mick Schumacher's crash and Chembulak Basi's crash were, the cars hit a concrete barrier, a concrete wall. Now, concrete walls don't, we don't have concrete walls so near, just next to the track. There needs to be a runoff bit before the concrete walls, right? So again, a lot of
And yeah, usually whenever you have concrete, you either have Aramco barriers
exactly.
before that, or some sort of a tire wall and things like that that absorbs that energy, that crash energy, and helps dissipate it. But yeah, a lot can be done to make the Saudi Arabian GP safer for everyone involved, I believe. And obviously, I think F1 has come out and said that they'll be reevaluating the future of F1 at Saudi Arabia. Obviously, it's a complex situation, a complex relationship that they share. But it was good to see that the whole F1 community came together with the impending threats and everything. But from here, obviously, we can't make any comments because we don't know the ground reality of what happened. We don't have any information that was actually shared between all the stakeholders. But it was good to see that everyone, walked away safely at the end of the day, put on a good show, and everything went fine. All right, we're almost 30 minutes. We're 30 minutes in, Vedant, but I want to make one last comment, and that is, tires are still a mystery for all the teams. We saw Max Verstappen struggle on new tires. We saw Lewis Hamilton struggle on new tires in qualifying. So the tires behave drastically differently from how they behaved in Bahrain. It seemed that you could go the whole race distance on just a set of hard tires, which were medium tires from last weekend. So I think this is going to be a challenge that is going to be there at every circuit, and the tires are going to behave differently, I believe, at every circuit. It's going to be interesting to see whoever gets on top. And at the moment, it seems that Red Bull is on top, or at least was on top in Saudi Arabia. So we'll see how it
Yeah,
pans out
definitely.
on
I
other
mean,
circuits.
I think, we as motorsport fans, like proper motorsport fans, I can say that we appreciate the importance of tires and the importance of the rubber in racing, right? But I think it is very much underappreciated how important the tires and how important the wheels are, especially given that we have a completely new set of wheels this season. We have a new size, we have a new construction, we have new the thickness, thickness, and so it takes time. And so it's like this season, everyone was marketing, like Formula One was just marketing the new aero regulations, but these small little things, the new tires, the aero regulations, and the new engines, and the new
We
engines.
talked about the double
So
whammy.
these little bits make the new regulations, these new cars, super difficult to master. And Red Bull have been a surprise because everyone would have thought that they were focusing on last season to win that championship, but to to start this season on top is a great success in itself for them.
Yeah, people talk about has Red Bull discovered the silver bullet that will give them, the edge, and I think that silver bullet Red Bull discovered, 20 years ago, and that was
Yeah.
Adrian Newey,
Yeah.
and he's got it right this time once again. But yeah, and talking about tires and stuff, after Bahrain, I was ready to jump on the podcast and be like, Mario Sola said that you'll be able to race throughout the stint of the tire, but that's not what we saw in Bahrain. But in Saudi Arabia, we raced throughout the race on any tires, that was provided. So again, like I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens, especially along with the development battle that will go on throughout the season. But one other piece of news, obviously, was heartbreak for Sergio Perez. You got to feel for the man. 215 races for his first pole. It seemed like he was in control in the front, and then just a badly timed, safety car, I guess, for him. It seemed like Red Bull fell for the Ferrari dummy, given that Checo was looking great on those tires, and there was absolutely no reason to pit. But what happened, and we can just hope to see Checo Perez up there once again.
Yeah, but it was so
throughout the
great
season.
to see him get that pole. And if you remember Mexico last year, and if you remember Checo Perez's father celebrating, celebrating only a podium, I don't know what was happening at Checo's home in Mexico with that pole position. So
There was definitely a party on Saturday night. Not so much on Sunday though. But yeah, again, like I'll make another addition to this conversation. That just goes to show how much how much difference a driving style and the car suiting a driver's driving style can make for the pace and the relative difference between teammates. But again, that just goes to show how good a driver Max is, that he performed just as well in the car last year, and he's performing just as well in a different car this year with different driving characteristics and whatnot. Whereas, someone like Checo Perez, Christian Horner commented that the car is better suited to his driving style, and he's finally delivering. But again, he couldn't deliver in a different kind of car with different characteristics last year. So that it speaks to both things, to the fact that Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, all of these guys are great. They're in a different league, but at the same time, it also brings us to the reality, makes us come face to face with the reality that adapting your driving style is not easy, and those who can do it, that's great, but it does really make a difference. We've seen Seb, Daniel Ricciardo, Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez, Gasly, Albon, all of these guys struggle over the last couple of years. But it's easy to say that hey, they're not performing well, but this just brings to light the fact that it is
Yeah,
genuinely
absolutely. I
difficult.
mean, they have been racing so many different cars since their careers began, and to adjust to each new car, to adjust to each, even in Formula One, when they moved teams, Carlos Sainz could adjust to the Ferrari better last year than Daniel Ricciardo could to the McLaren, basically, right? So yeah, it's super difficult. Each driver has their own driving style, and sometimes they adjust their driving style to the car. Sometimes they are able to adjust the car to their driving styles. So it always is a
But
compromise
yeah,
between
but
performance and getting comfortable in the car.
yep, yep. Well, that's all I believe, Vedant, from our side for this podcast. Obviously, Ferrari still leads the Constructors' Championship with 78 points, 40 points ahead of Mercedes at 38 and 37 for Red Bull. Charles Leclerc picking up those two important fastest lap points, both in Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia, and he currently leads the Drivers' Championship also. But yeah, a lot to look forward to. One last question before we leave, Vedant: who is going to win in
Yeah, for
Australia?
Australia, I think I have. I mean, I want Carlos Sainz to get that win as soon as possible, right? But I still think he's still struggling a bit with the car, and it will still be between Max and Charles. But let's go for Charles this time. Let's make it an alternate. Yeah,
Uh, well, there's four DRS zones. The track's faster. There's not as many corners. I'm sorry. I mean, I want, for me, Ferrari transcends any driver, and I want to see Ferrari at least win the
yeah,
constructors, even if we don't see Charles or Carlos, win the drivers. But given the track characteristics, 2 weeks out, I would have to say, that Red Bull do have the upper hand, and it does seem that Red Bull have a little bit more performance than Ferrari too. Obviously it's getting longer now, but Red Bull, the car is not porpoising at all compared to the Ferrari. Ferrari has relatively less porpoising compared to the rest of the grid, but Red Bull is a much more stable car, and I don't know how tunable the porpoising is, but if Red Bull were to extract a little bit more performance and compromise with a little bit more porpoising instead, I believe they could they could be a tenth ahead of Ferrari even today. So we'll see what happens. And I've said the same thing about I think Alfa Romeo and Haas against the Mercedes, that they haven't had great testings, and they're still learning their car compared to the Mercedes, who are now trying to troubleshoot their problems. And I wouldn't be surprised if they leapfrog Mercedes as the development walk continues throughout the season. But enough about that, Vedant. We've talked for about 40 minutes. It's time to wrap up this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me once again, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. And obviously, we'll catch you on the next one.